Ready? بسم الله الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه ثم أما بعد. To proceed. So today inshallah we are still talking about the third qaida, the third legal maxim, لا ضرر ولا ضرار, there should be no harm or reciprocation of harm. This is the third legal maxim. We will have one more session inshallah on this maxim and then we will move on to the fourth. And the fourth will be المشقة تجلب التيسير, or hardship begets facility. And then the fifth will be العادة محكمة, custom is authoritative. And then we will go over the minor legal maxims and then the regulators or الضوابط. So we may be halfway through because the two other sections are a little bit shorter than the first two sections. The first one was the introductions, and the second one is the major legal maxims. And the major legal maxims is basically the largest section, particularly the first two were even larger because al-a'mal bin-niyat, deeds are but by their intentions, is a very large one. So we may be able to finish this before al-adab al-mufrad. Anyway, الضرر لا يزال بمثله is the qaida that we will go over today. Harm is not removed by an equal harm. Harm is not removed by an equal harm. So remember last time we said that ضرر يزال, harm must be removed. And then this qaida will come to control and regulate the previous qaida. Because if harm is to be removed, then we have to ask ourselves, how do we remove harm? And at what expense are we removing the harm? At what expense? Can we remove harm by an equal harm? No, because that would not make sense. You're replacing harm by an equal harm. And a fortiori, bil awla, you cannot remove harm by larger, greater harm. So then you cannot. Then but this qaida will tell us this, will tell us that you cannot remove harm by an equal harm or a greater harm. And then the next qaida will basically tell us that you can remove harm by a lesser harm. Now, some of the applications of this qaida. It's impermissible for a person to prevent flooding of their land by flooding their neighbor's land. So basically, if your land is getting flooded and you redirect the water to your neighbor's land, that is impermissible because that's removing harm by an equal harm. A person in dire necessity, which is a muttar, cannot consume the food of another person who is in dire necessity, muttar, like him, because we say سواه في الاضطرار وانفرد عنه في الملك. سواه في الاضطرار وانفرد عنه في الملك. So if he's like him, muttar, like, so you have a little bit of food, I have nothing, we're traveling, we're hungry, we're starving, there's no food around us, I cannot take yours because we're equal in اضطرار, and the food is yours, it's not mine. But if you have extra, then I can take it. I can even fight you to take it if you don't willingly give it to me, because I am muttar. Now, and then I will have to compensate you for it. I'll have to compensate you for it. Then someone compelled to kill cannot save their life by sacrificing their brother's life. I have talked to you before about our ethical system being to a great extent utilitarian, but it is not utilitarian like, Benthamite utilitarianism or, like your good old utilitarianism. No, we have guidelines. It is religious utilitarianism. It is a system that basically values human interest, human well-being, human welfare, values al-maslaha, but it is divinely guided, it's moral, principled. So religious utilitarianism is a good name for, or divinely guided, or moral, or principled utilitarian, whatever name you can craft for it. So it is not complete utilitarianism because our objectives are different. Our worldview is different. So we believe that there is something beyond matter, you know, where we believe that we are spiritual beings in physical forms. We believe that there is something beyond matter. So our objectives are different, our worldview is different, and we have the divine guidelines that will protect us from basically unchecked utilitarianism, This is one of the basically guidelines. If you cannot kill your brother to save yourself. So if someone holds a gun to you and says, kill so-and-so, or I will kill you, you cannot kill so-and-so. The same applies to rape also. You can't rape, you can't kill, even if there is a gun held to your head, because that is removing harm by equal harm. So the fact that it is not your harm, and like it doesn't mean much. From the divine perspective, you can that is removing harm by equal harm. So if someone does, and kills their brother because they are being threatened, then what happens? Who is going to be liable? Both are liable. Al-Mukrih wal-Mukrah are both liable according to Malik and Ahmad and one of the two positions of al-Shafi'i. Al-Mukrih and al-Mukrah are both liable for equal retribution. Al-Mukrih is the compeller and Mukrah is the compelled. Okay, there is a very important sub-maxim that we have to, pay attention to. It's one of the most beautiful sub-maxims, which is the oppressed cannot oppress others. The oppressed cannot oppress others. You could, say, لا يجوز للظالم أن يظلم, explicitly affirmed by the Hanafis and upheld by all jurists. I'll give you a few examples. If someone, sometimes people fought over lands because the landmarks, sometimes the people moved the landmarks, or sometimes people questioned whether this is my border. So al-ghasib, the misappropriator, is not always a criminal. The misappropriator, the one who seizes land by force or seizes property by force, may be mistaken. But whether they are mistaken or they are criminal, they're still liable. But their liability does not mean that we oppress them, that we transgress them. So if you plant crops on a land that you forcibly seized, misappropriated land, and you plant crops, then the land gets returned to the rightful owner, and there are crops on the land. What happens in this case? You either pay them, reimburse them for the expenses. You either reimburse them for the expenses or allow them time to harvest the crops for rent. So they'll pay you rent until you harvest, until they will pay rent also retrospectively for all the time that they had seized your land or misappropriated your land. But you will be given the choice as the rightful owner to let them harvest their crops and they pay you rent, or to reimburse them for their expenses and then you harvest the crops. So here, what are we doing? We're basically observing the right of the ghasib, the misappropriator. So he's zalim, but the fact that he's zalim does not allow us to nazlimuhu or to transgress him or her. Okay, And look at the example of equal retribution, for instance, al-qisas, equal retribution or al-qisas. In al-qisas or equal retribution, we have to ensure al-amn min al-hayf. Al-amn min al-hayf is basically avoidance of inequity or, excess. So if someone cuts someone's hand from here or someone's arm, of course, if someone cuts someone's hand from here, you cannot cut their arm from here. So equality, and equal retribution, that's why it's called equal retribution. But if someone cuts someone's arm from here, do we cut their arm from here? Yes, unless we fear that it will penetrate, it's like too close to the jawf, too close to the hollow interior of the body, and it will cause greater harm that we will not be able to control. And the same applies to, equality in the body part, equality in the integrity and the health of the body part. So when it comes to qisas, we do not, if we cannot ensure equality and we cannot ensure non-transgression, no excess. If we cannot ensure that there will be no excess, then we don't do equal retribution. What do we do in place? Compensation, ad-diya, compensation in place of equal retribution, because al-amn min al-hayf is a condition. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, didn't Allah say وَكَتَبْنَا عَلَيْهِمْ فِيهَا أَنَّ النَّفْسَ بِالنَّفْسِ وَالْعَيْنَ بِالْعَيْنِ وَالْأَنْفَ بِالْأَنْفِ وَالْأُذُنَ بِالْأُذُنِ وَالسِّنَّ بِالسِّنِّ وَالْجُرُوحَ قِصَاص. So, and the wounds are equal for equal. So a soul for a soul, eye for eye, etc. But equal for equal is what is prescribed. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَإِنْ عَاقَبْتُمْ فَعَاقِبُوا بِمِثْلِ مَا عُوقِبْتُمْ بِهِ وَلَئِنْ صَبَرْتُمْ لَهُوَ خَيْرٌ لِلصَّابِرِينَ, which would translate as, and if you punish, then punish with an equivalent of that which you were harmed. But if you're patient, it is better for those who are patient. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also says, وَجَزَاءُ سَيِّئَةٍ سَيِّئَةٌ مِثْلُهَا فَمَنْ عَفَا وَأَصْلَحَ فَأَجْرُهُ عَلَى اللَّهِ, which will translate to, the retribution for an evil act is an equivalent evil one, but whoever pardons and makes reconciliation, the reward is with Allah. You notice, so you notice that the fairness of the system, it allows for equal retribution. It allows for qisas. وَإِنْ عَاقَبْتُمْ فَعَاقِبُوا بِمِثْلِ مَا عُوقِبْتُمْ بِهِ. But it points to what? Sort of the higher ethical ground. وَلَئِنْ صَبَرْتُمْ لَهُوَ خَيْرٌ لِلصَّابِرِينَ فَمَنْ عَافَ وَأَصْلَحَ فَأَجْرُهُ عَلَى اللَّهِ وَلَئِنْ صَبَرْتُمْ لَهُوَ خَيْرٌ لِلصَّابِرِينَ. If you're patient, then it's better for the patient ones. فَمَنْ عَافَ وَأَصْلَحَ, he who pardons and forgives, فَأَجْرُهُ عَلَى اللَّهِ, then the reward will be with Allah. Then it is allowing for equal retribution. It's which is fairness, but it is pointing to the higher ethical ground. Now, this higher ethical ground is not always higher, by the way. That's why sometimes it's not the, sometimes forgiveness is not the higher ethical ground. Because if you forgive like a basically a repetitive offender, then you're emboldening the repetitive offender. Then you're causing harm to the society. If someone keeps on harming people and keeps on getting forgiven by people, because all the people are basically trying to reach for the higher ethical ground, then certainly that would cause greater harm. That would not be wisdom in this case. Wisdom in this case is to ask for equal retribution, and it is the more moral and ethical conduct in such a scenario. But if someone commits like someone gets nervous and loses their loses control and commits like a crime, and you feel that forgiving them is warranted and it may be better for you and them, then certainly your reward will be with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. For this reason, the jurists stipulated that, no, I guess we finished this part. And, so this maxim is a very profound one, because most of the time what happens, basically the vicious cycle of oppression, the vicious cycle of conflict and oppression and transgression is caused by, reciprocation of harm, reciprocation of harm, more harm, reciprocation of harm. Someone needs to cut through this cycle. So like for instance, some people say an eye for an eye will make the whole world blind. We don't believe in this. We believe that allowing criminals, letting criminals go unchecked will make the world blind. But again, at the same time, we do have room for, for breaking through this cycle of perpetual vicious sort of oppression and reciprocation of oppression, harm, and reciprocation of harm. It's not always, sometimes it's warranted, sometimes it's not. Whatever is more conducive to well-being, for the individuals and the society, to fairness, to justice, should be done. Umar ibn Abdul Aziz rahimahullah said, بلغني أن الرجل لا يظلم بمظلمة فلا يزال المظلوم يشتم الظالم ويتنقصه حتى يستوفي حقه ويكون للظالم الفضل عليه. It has reached me that when a man is wronged, he continues to curse and degrade the oppressor until he has taken back his right, and the oppressor then ends up having a right over him, ends up having, the upper hand over him. So someone oppresses you, you continue to curse them, you continue to abuse them until you have basically recouped all of your right, and then you transgress, and the oppressor becomes, in this case, the oppressed, and they have a right over you. So this is a very important qaida to keep in mind. Exceptions from the major qaida, from exceptions from qaida al-darar la yuzal bimithlihi, harm is not to be removed by an equal harm, is the ghasib. The ghasib sometimes. So remember when we said if the ghasib plants crops, what if the ghasib, the misappropriator, builds a structure on your land or plants trees in your land? What do we do in this case? So we will force him to remove, like, you have the right. You could tell him, I'll take it, but you'll have the right to have them uproot the trees, demolish the building, uproot the trees, and take your land back. The difference between crops and trees is what? One is transient and one is not. The temporality is the difference. So the crops I can, leave for a couple of weeks and then you harvest it and then get my land, but the trees are different. And the Prophet ﷺ said, لَيْسَ لِعِرْقِ ظَالِمٍ حَقٍّ or لَيْسَ لِعِرْقٍ ظَالِمٍ حَقٍّ. لَيْسَ لِعِرْقِ ظَالِمٍ أو لِعِرْقٍ ظَالِمٍ. So لَيْسَ لِعِرْقِ ظَالِمٍ, which means that the root of an oppressor does not have any right. لَيْسَ لِعِرْقٍ ظَالِمٍ, the oppressive root does not have any right, as if the root itself is described as oppressive. There is no right for unjust roots. There is no right for unjust roots. So this qaida should be clear. Darar la yuzal bimithlihi, harm is not to be removed by an equal harm. The next qaida is basically to tell you that you could remove harm by a lesser harm. Ad-darar al-ashad yuzal bid-darar al-khaf. Greater harm is removed by lesser harm. Some consider this maxim and the two other ones, يختار أهون الشرين وإذا تعارض مفسدتان روعي أعظمهما ضررا بارتكاب أخفهما. So يختار أهون الشرين. يختار أهون الشرين is the lesser evil is chosen. الضرر الأشد يزال بالضرر الأخف. So this is greater. Oh, I'm sorry. This is greater harm is to be removed by the lesser harm. And then you have يختار أهون الشرين. الشرين, the two evils, right? Two evils. أهون is the lesser. يختار is chosen. So this will translate into the lesser evil. The lesser of the two evils is chosen. The lesser of the two evils is chosen. Are they the same? They're not the same. What's different? Yeah, but the other, yeah. No, it's telling you that you should choose it. It's not like you have choice. It's telling you that you should choose the lesser of the two evils. It's not giving you the choice. Yes. So الضرر الأشد يزال بالضرر الأخف. We're dealing with a harm that is existent and we are removing it by a lesser harm. But you are here at the crossroads. In the second one, you are at the crossroads. You have two pathways, not a third, two options. Both of them entail harm, but one entails greater harm. Then you have to take, at this bifurcation, you have to take the route that will cause the lesser harm, not the greater harm. So we're talking here about, harm that is existence and harm that is expected. Maybe it is. You know the trolley problem, like to switch the tracks of the train because you have like less people on this track than maybe it is. And then so يختار أهون الشرين is basically when there are sort of where we have to choose. We don't have a third option. We have to choose between two options. One of them is worse than the other. All these maxims take into account that harm is not uniform in degree, rather it varies in its nature and its effects. Allah Almighty says, وَالْفِتْنَةُ أَشَدُّ مِنَ الْقَتْلِ, and fitna is worse than killing. And fitna here is basically to force people away from their deen, to persecute people away from their deen. And there are several obligations. One of them is the obligation, several applications. One of them is the obligation to remove water spouts and sabats. Sabat is the canopy. We've gone over this before. If you have like a water spout that's causing harm to the people, you have to remove it and stuff, because that's the lesser harm. We're talking here about removing an existing harm by a lesser harm. So if you have a water spout that is causing harm to pedestrians, or a canopy that's causing harm to pedestrians, the lesser harm is basically to order you to remove it. Even even if you had built it when the road was lower or the pathway was lower and the canopy was not causing problems. If the canopy is now causing problems after 35 years, we will ask you to remove it because it is causing harm to the pedestrians. Divorce, for instance. If the harm of marriage is greater than the harm of divorce, divorce is a bad thing. I've written a paper about the ruling of divorce. You know, so sometimes the sisters ask if divorce is halal for men. I believe that the default for divorce is prohibition. It's not halalness, it is prohibition. It's not the majority position, but it is, I believe, strongly in this position. This is a position of some Hanafis, and this is the position of Ibn Taymiyyah, that divorce is forbidden, is not halal. How could that be? We say that the 5 rulings apply to divorce: haram, halal, you know, I'm sorry, haram, wajib, mustahab, makruh, and mubah. All 5 rulings apply to divorce. But what is the default? Default, prohibited, haram, because it leads to harm. So the al-asl fi al-talaq al-hadr. This is the expression they use. Al-aslu fi al-talaq al-hadr. So the default with regard to divorce is prohibition, So why is it that we have, you know, a hadith that says in abghad al-halal and Allah talaq, the most disliked thing in the sight of Allah, most disliked of the halal things in the sight of Allah, talaq? Why do we have this hadith? First of all, it's controversial. The hadith may not be authentic. Second, it is, if we say it is authentic, we're assuming that this is a warranted divorce. We're assuming that this is still a warranted divorce, not a completely unprovoked divorce. When we say the default in talaq is prohibition, we're talking about talaq that is, you know, the paper that I shared with you on, you know, the change of fatwa in family laws, it is in your folder. It talks about change of fatwa in family laws. This is one of the chapters, al-asl talaq al-hadr. The default with regard to divorce is prohibition. So if it is unprovoked, it's unwarranted, then it has to be prohibition. Because you know, if the Prophet ﷺ says that talaq is basically the sort of the greatest priority for the shaitan is to cause divorce. So there is a hadith in Muslim where the shaitan dispatches his troops and says, I will crown the one who causes the greatest harm and fitna. And then, you know, someone comes and says, I had him kill, you know, someone, I had him do this, I had him mistreat his parents, etc. And the shaitan that will come and say, I continued to urge him until I separated between him and his wife, the shaitan will bring him closer to him and will crown him. And he will say, you are the one. So if the Prophet ﷺ is telling us that this is a highest priority for the shaitan, then it just can't be basically halal. Anyway, having said that, talaq sometimes can be the lesser of the two evils. The lesser of the two evils. And this is one of the applications. That's why talaq is permissible in Islam versus you know, Catholicism or something like that. Now, the annulment of marriage also. Yes. So the same applies to annulment. So we can ask for annulment of marriage. Like if you marry someone and they have hidden like a problem, like and the problem that affects the العيوب التي يفسخ بها النكاح, or the flaws that allow for annulment of marriage, are basically controversial among the madhahib, but some of them are like, let us say for example, for a mother, in the example, you didn't tell your spouse that you have HIV, for instance. Well, it will cause them an anxiety, it will cause them harm. They can ask for annulment. They can ask for annulment. Yeah, so annulment sometimes can be the lesser of the two evils. Now, if a man becomes completely broke and doesn't have has no financial capacity to sustain their family, will we allow the wife to ask for annulment? Yes, we will allow her to ask for annulment. 3 out of 4 madhahib will allow her to ask for annulment. That's Malikis, Shafi'is, and Hanbalis. The Hanafis will have them locked up until he spends. You know, they will allow her. But anyway, so they will basically figure out a way to force him or to have her released, to force him to spend or to have her released. That is, in this case, why are we doing this? Because the harm of staying in the marriage for the wife is greater than the harm of the annulment of the marriage. You know, if he's unable to sustain a family, then that causes a greater harm. Fighting a rebellious group. This could also be, you know, the same concept. When you fight a rebellious group, the rebellious group is a group of Muslims that are rebelling against the legitimate imam. And in this case, it causes harm, but it is the lesser harm. Likewise, so it has, you know, the spectrum of applications is huge. So from fighting a rebellious group to talaq and annulment, and to something as, you know, small as turning your cell phone off if you're praying. You're praying and, you know, your cell phone is ringing and you're praying in congregation. You take it out of your pocket, you turn it off, you put it back in your pocket. So this movement in prayer is harm because it disrupts the khushu' in the prayer. And when you do this, you also will distract the people next to you. But is it the lesser harm or the greater harm? It's the lesser harm than just to keep the phone ringing. Closely related to this maxim is a maxim that we will discuss later. Next session, inshallah, we will discuss the maxim of private harm. We will discuss the maxim. No, it's not about me. You know, I'm. So the private harm is endured to avert public harm. Private harm is endured to avert public harm is another maxim that is related to this one. Okay, so let's move on to the big one. يختار أهون الشرين. This is a very important maxim and it has many applications. يختار أهون الشرين. The lesser of two evils is chosen. وإذا تعارضت مفسدتان رُعِيَ أعظمهما ضررا بارتكاب أخفهما. When two harms conflict, the greater harm is mitigated by committing the lesser. When two harms conflict, the greater harm is mitigated by committing the lesser harm. يختار أهون الشرين. This is must be chosen. أهون, lesser, الشرين, two evils. Okay. This is hikmah. This is basically the basis of hikmah or wisdom. So Imam Taymiyyah rahimahullah said, al-aqil, the wise man or the wise person is not the person who sorts out evil from good. Sorting out evil from good is not wisdom, you know, because most people are able to do this. Wisdom is to sort out the greater of two evils and the greater of two goods. Sort out the greater of two evils, the greater of the two goods. And to be able to mitigate the greater evil by tolerating the lesser one, and to procure the greater benefit by forsaking the lesser one. So this is an important concept. So Sadi rahimahullah says in his 33rd قاعدة إذا تزاحمت المصالح قدم الأعلى منها فيقدم الواجب على المستحب والراجح مصلحة على المرجوح وإذا تزاحمت المفاسد واضطر إلى فعل أحدها قدم الأخف منها. If interests conflict, the higher one is prioritized, so an obligatory act is preferred over a recommended one, and a more significant benefit is prioritized over a lesser one. If harms conflict and one must be committed, the lesser of the two is chosen. Remember when we had a fatwa during the time of COVID, Amja, we had a fatwa about scarcity of resources. Like you have one vent. We were making basically a lot of assumptions about how there would be great scarcity of resources and thousands of people are dying, millions are dying, and all of that stuff. You know, at the beginning of the scare, it was so. We were talking about like if you have one vent and you have 3 patients, and you will have to choose what are you going to do? Like so. If you have a patient with, you know, the 3 patients, you will have to figure out metrics by which you determine which patient will be put on the vent. And certainly, it's not going to be, you know, this will be a very difficult situation, but you will have to be making very, very tough choices. And you will have to be talking about life expectancy. So if you have a 30-year-old and a 75-year-old, which one will you put on the vent? That will look like discrimination against old people. Yeah, you know, so I'm almost 60. So so you have a 60-year-old and a 25-year-old. So in this case, and you have one vent, and don't tell me, you know, figure it out. No, there is only one vent. Both need this vent. Both will die without this vent. So do you put the one who's 60 or the one who's 25 on the vent? And if you say life expectancy is, let us say life expectancy is 80 years or whatever it is, and so this person has 20 years left. Give it, nobody knows. You can say, are you God? No, I'm not God. I'm just talking about life expectancy. These 2 people, I don't know how, but life expectancy is about 80 years. So this person may have 55 years ahead of them. This person may have 20 years ahead of them. If I put the 25-year-old on the vent, I am basically saving 55 years of life. It has to be down to this. It has to be down to this. But then someone may say, you know, this 60-year-old may have little kids who need him, and this 25-year-old may have nobody who needs them. Would you factor this in? You factor this in as well. And it gets to be an extremely difficult predicament. Certainly, it would have been a very difficult predicament for healthcare providers, healthcare workers, and so on, if we got to that point. But if you get to that point, you will be making very, very tough choices, and they look very evil, but it's the lesser of two evils. So it may look very evil that you are saying, I am not putting this person on the vent because they are older. I'm not putting this person on the vent because they have no dependence. I am not, it sounds very evil, like I'm letting this guy die because he's this or that. But in this case, I am forced to choose one of two evils. They're both evil. If I let go of this or let go of that, they're both evil. So Ibn Rajab, it will sometimes it can get to be extremely difficult, and many times there will be things that you will not consider because they will be very subjective, and you will not consider. You will have to find things that are objective, like age, dependence, something that is very objective that can be justified. And instead of saying that this person is worth more than that person because this person, one of the things that we've talked about also is healthcare workers. Do you prioritize healthcare workers? In a situation of this nature, you will prioritize healthcare workers, because every healthcare worker you lose, you're losing many people with them. Because if you have scarcity of resources and these are the people who are saving lives, then you ought to prioritize them, because by prioritizing them, you're prioritizing the people who are saving lives. I'm just telling you, this is an example of having to choose between different evils. Okay. Ibn Rajab said, you could read this, it's the same concept. Ibn al-Najjar said, من أدلة الفقه أيضا قول الفقهاء ضرب المفاسد أولى من جلب المصالح ودفع أعلاها أي أعلى المفاسد بأدناها. Another legal proof is the jurist's statement, repelling harms takes precedence over bringing benefits, and the most severe harm is repelled by the least severe. This maxim acknowledges that life is a realm of trials. Benefits conflict, harms conflict, and it may not be always completely, it may not be always possible to separate the harm from the benefit and get the pure benefit and avoid harm. So الإمام تقي الدين ابن تيمية رحمه الله said, الواجب تحصيل المصالح وتكميلها وتعطيل المفاسد وتقليلها، فإذا تعارضت كان تحصيل أعظم المصلحتين بتفويت أدناهما ودفع أعظم المفسدتين مع احتمال أدناهما هو المشروع. The obligation is to secure benefits and perfect them while averting harms and minimizing them. If they conflict, the greater benefit is attained by sacrificing the lesser, and the greater harm is averted by tolerating the lesser. This is the prescribed approach. This is the prescribed approach. So this is often referred to, remember, like you hear sometimes about fiqh al-muwazanat and fiqh al-awlawiyat. That's what this is about. Fiqh al-muwazanat is the fiqh of balances. Fiqh al-awlawiyat is the fiqh of priorities. This is where it's coming from. So don't be, frazzled when you hear about fiqh al-muwazanat and fiqh al-awlawiyat. I know many people get frazzled, because they think the fuqaha are just corrupting the deen, and they're just like just being too, interventionists. No, it is all based on these solid maxims, these solid Islamic principles. So fiqh al-muwazanat, balances, and awlawiyat, priorities, is based on this maxim. So the legal evidence for this maxim is there are so many countless ones, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says يسألونك عن الشهر الحرام قتال فيه قل قتال فيه كبير وصد عن سبيل الله وكفر به والمسجد الحرام وإخراج أهله منه أكبر عند الله والفتنة أكبر من القتل ولا يزالون يقتلونكم إلى آخر الآيات. So they ask you about let's read the translation. They ask you about the fighting in the sacred month. Say fighting therein is grave, but averting people from the way of Allah and disbelief in Him and preventing access to Al-Masjid al-Haram and expelling its people from it are greater in the sight of Allah, and fitna is worse than killing. Fitna is to forcibly, divert people or avert people, sway people away from their deen, persecute them away from their deen till they leave their deen. And the Prophet ﷺ also said that Iman bid'un wa sab'una shu'ba fa'a'laha la ilaha illallah wa adnaha imatatul adha an at-tariq. Iman is 60 some or 70 some branches. The highest is la ilaha illallah and the lowest is to remove harm from the pathway, which tells you what? That things are not equal. Good things are not all equal. Bad things are not all equal. There are priorities. The Prophet ﷺ said to Aisha, "O Aisha, had your people not been so recently in a state of jahiliyyah or ignorance, I would have demolished the Kaaba, made it level with the ground, given it 2 doors, one on the east and one on the west, and expanded it by 6 cubits from the Hajj, for Quraysh had shortened it when they built it." So why did he refrain from doing the right thing? Because it will cause discord among the Qurayshis and fitna, because they used to value al-Kaaba a lot, and to demolish it would cause discord and would cause like fitna among Quraysh. They are new. So when Abdullah ibn demolished the Kaaba, did that thing, so the Kaaba looked a little bit more rectangular during the time of Abdullah ibn Zubayr. Nowadays it's like square. It was more rectangular during the time of Abdullah ibn Zubayr. Why? Because he put the Hijr inside the Kaaba, because the Hijr belongs inside the Kaaba. Quraysh had sort of the shortage of funds when they were building the Kaaba, so they put the Hijr outside of the Kaaba. Now, the Hijr is still outside the Kaaba. Should we put it back in and do what the Prophet wanted to do? It depends, So if you do this, they will say that, look at the Saudis there. That will be the final straw now. So if people see the Kaaba being demolished, that will be the final straw. So in this case, even now, because how are you going to basically inform all those people, like 2 billion Muslims, about the truth? That actually the Prophet meant to do that. So in this case, you shouldn't, because it will cause a lot more fitna than it's worth doing. So even now, after 1400 years, you can't do it. You can't do what the Prophet wanted to do because of the fitna. Why did Abdullah ibn Zubayr do it? Because people, this was a few decades after Quraysh converted to Islam, and he felt that, people are educated enough and people are Muslim enough that I can do it now. And he was able to do it. And it didn't cause much upheaval when he did it. But anyway, then they changed it back, yes. Anyway, so similarly, in the case of the Bedouin man who was urinating in the masjid, the Prophet ﷺ said, "La tuzrimu," don't interrupt him, because if you let him finish, you know. So like someone is urinating in the masjid, well, that looks to the Sahaba like sort of heretical and blasphemous. But the Prophet ﷺ said, let him finish, let him finish. Because imagine if the, so during the act of urination, if they come and attack him, what kind of mess that will cause. So the principle of prioritization. So Imam Taqiyuddin ibn Taymiyyah mentioned some cases here where he said, when it comes to prioritization, he said the first type relates to prioritizing obligatory over recommended. To prioritize obligatory over recommended. To basically pay off your debt or give charity. Pay off your debt or give charity. What do you prioritize? Pay off your debt. One is obligatory and one is recommended. Okay, prioritizing an individual obligation over a communal obligation to basically provide for your family or to finance non-obligatory jihad, jihad that is not obligatory on you. You have money, only enough to either provide for your family or to finance non-obligatory jihad, jihad that is not obligatory on you specifically, like you're not being demanded to go out. Because if you're demanded to go out, you will have to finance your campaign, your campaign. So you provide for your family and you don't finance that non-obligatory jihad. You prioritize your family. Different examples, like, do you prioritize dhikr or Quran or salah? Recitation of the Quran, dhikr or salah? Then recitation of the Quran, because that's the best dhikr. Then dhikr. Given what? Given that all of them will engage your heart similarly. But if you feel like dhikr now will engage my heart more, then you give precedence to dhikr now. So it will not be always, but it will be now. Recitation of the Quran is better than dhikr because that's the best dhikr, is the word of speech of God, to remember God by reciting his word. That's the best form of dhikr. And salah is the ultimate, form of union, our union with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Sunni union, not the bid'i union, not the blasphemous union, but our Sunni union, being together with Allah, this togetherness with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Salah is your basically way to that union or togetherness with Allah. And which part of salah is you would be closest to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Sujood. So there is no togetherness or union with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala more than what you will have in your sujood. Okay, then other applications. So in terms of prohibitions, we like, can a woman during their time, women traveling alone is like a long story, but during their time, they allowed women to travel alone if she was immigrating from the land of disbelief to the land of belief, from Dar al-Harb to Dar al-Islam, from, the land of Kufr to the land of Islam. Because in this case, it would be the lesser of the two evils. The greater evil is to stay in the land of disbelief. This maxim has also countless other applications. The legislation of jihad itself is to repel harm from the disbelievers because, the domination of disbelievers over Muslims will cause greater harm than the harm of jihad itself. We allow in transactions some degree of gharar, because if you don't allow any degree of gharar, that will cause what? So much harm. If you don't allow any degree of uncertainty or speculation in transactions, that will freeze the market. There has to be some gharar here and there, because otherwise, if you want to eliminate gharar, risk-taking, uncertainty, speculation, if you want to eliminate gharar from transactions, you will kill the market. And so gharar was allowed for this. Some degree of gharar. Of course, excessive gharar is not allowed. Refraining from condemning wrongdoing if it causes greater harm, that's one example. If al-amr bil-ma'ruf wa nahy an al-munkar will cause greater munkar, then you refrain from ordaining good and forbidding bad. You ordain good and forbidding bad if it's conducive to good, not munkar. Endurance of the oppression and injustice of rulers, as rebellion against them often leads to greater harm and corruption than their tyranny. And that is basically one of the applications. According to Ahl Sunnah, you endure the oppression of the rulers because rebelling will cause greater harm. Now, so this is a long story, and if you want to get my detailed position, we went over this when we discussed al-Umda. So it will be under rebellion, qital al-bugha, fighting against the rebels, rules, the rules with fighting against the rebels. But anyway, I just want to tell you that this is basically about an armed group trying to seize power from an established sort of regime or established sultan, an armed group trying to seize power from an established sultan. You tolerate the oppression because how did they come to the conclusion that rebellion will lead to greater harm? How did they come to that conclusion? Did the Prophet say that? Or is it istiqra? Istiqra, it's an inductive examination of the history. So they looked at the history, they looked at they looked at al-Hussein, they looked at Ibn al-Ash'ath, they looked at Ibn Zubayr, they looked at Sahib al-Nafs al-Zakiyya, they looked at Zayd, they looked at every single rebellion except for the Abbasis. The Abbasis were able eventually to seize power from the Umayyads. That was a form of rebellion. Why were they not called rebels? Because they won. And so that's the only difference. But based on this qaida, would we say that if rebellion is the lesser of two evils and the greater evil is basically tolerance of or endurance of the oppression of the ruler, based on this qaida, will rebellion be favored? Yes, based on the qaida. But now we have many nusus, texts of revelation, that we need to address, and this is not going to be the time for this. But if you want more details, go to the chapter in Umda where we discuss the rebellion and fighting against the rebels. But of course, this talks about, this is not talking about Ahl al-Hal wal-Aqd removing the sultan or the imam. We're not talking here, we're talking about armed rebellion by a group. Ahl al-Hal wal-Aqd, the people in authority, can remove the imam. This is a different discussion. This is not the discussion of rebellion. People in authority, Ahl al-Hal wal-Aqd, can remove the Imam. This is not called the rebellion, and this is not the subject of this discussion. Also not the subject of this discussion, the condemnation of the evil by the rulers. This is different. This is not an act of rebellion. Rebellion is the armed rebellion by a group against the established authority. Then also we have among the applications is accepting positions of authority where some degree of injustice exists, So Imam Taymiyyah rahimahullah, he fought against the Tatars by himself. And, he sort of displayed legendary heroism in fighting against the Tatars, in basically leading the campaign, recruiting. The Sultan himself went to him in Egypt to bring him to Asham to fight, and so on and so forth. So he was very, at the forefront of the resistance of the Tatars. But when the Tatars became in control in certain areas, he validated the reasoning that some of the Muslim scholars provided for working as judges and imams under the authority of the Tatars. He said that these people wanted, so someone who's obsessed with fighting with the Tatars, he could still see that you may work with them, and the rationale that they provided for working as judges and imams under the Tatars made sense to him. Because now that they are in control, if you don't basically accept those positions, more harm will ensue. So he said that these people wanted to avert harm from the masses, from the public, as much as they could, because to provide this buffer between the masses and the ruler, because the ruler cannot basically administer or cannot control the entire population by themselves. So the ruler will need a layer of executives and judges and imams and so on and so forth. So would you work for that oppressive ruler to try as much as you can to mitigate some of the harm and protect the masses from some of the harm, like work like as a filter between the ruler and the public? He said that this is a valid sort of rationale. Also, according to a weaker opinion, you could sort of cut open the abdomen of a deceased woman if you can extract the fetus alive. If it is hoped that the fetus is still viable and alive, you could cut open the abdomen. This is the weaker position in the madhab, and we've discussed this before. And we've discussed, the rationale behind the stronger position in the madhab. So now, during their time, you have a woman who died during childbirth. A woman who died during childbirth, and the fetus is moving inside. You detect some movement of the fetus inside. The question is, should we cut the abdomen and extract the fetus, deliver the fetus? This would be a cesarean section, but it was not like, it was not like the modern cesarean section. It would be without anesthesia or anything. You just cut the abdomen open. She's already dead. So we have two positions in the madhab, and there is disagreement within the madhab. Some said some said that the certain sacredness of the deceased should be prioritized over the speculative life of the baby, or the sort of uncertain life of the baby and or the fetus. And some people said that the sacredness of the living should be prioritized over the sacredness of the dead. Do you see the rationale behind the two positions? There is and like I said last time, this shows you that our fuqaha did not treat women as basically sort of a productive tool, or like a reproductive machine, They would sacrifice the fetus because the life of the fetus is uncertain, for the sacredness of that dead woman, because they felt that, and certainly the Prophet ﷺ is the one who said this, that he forbade mutilation of dead bodies. He said that kasra azm al-mayit ka kasrihi hayyan, breaking the bone of the dead is like breaking the bone of the living. So dead people have, or dead bodies are sacred, and they have their sacredness. Yeah. So nowadays it would be a little bit different. And so in the Hanbali madhab, they favored which position? In the classical Hanbali madhab, they favored the sacredness of the dead woman. So they said that the life of the fetus is uncertain. What is certain is the sacredness of the dead body. So that's what I'm saying. So now it may be different. And I even said this in the thing that I sent you. I mentioned that. I mentioned that the less favorable position may become more favorable because of the change in circumstances. So nowadays, I think it would be a no-brainer that you will extract the fetus, because if you're able to detect, heartbeats and so on, and get the fetus out, then I think that the sacredness of life should be prioritized in our times. In their times, it was like, they may have tried it a few times, by the way, because they said that most likely the fetus will not live. Most likely the fetus will not live. This was going to be a very messy procedure, by the way. Like, it's a very messy procedure. And most likely the fetuses did not live. In our times, most likely, if you're able to detect heartbeats, and if you can do the emergency C-section and get the fetus out, most likely the fetus will live. So that is where the fatwa changes with the change of times and circumstances. So whoever misappropriates a thread to bind the wound of a respected being must return it if doing so does not cause harm. Otherwise, they are liable for its value. So you misappropriate a thread and you stitch a wound with this thread. We will tell you undo it if it does not cause greater harm. But if it causes greater harm, then we will not demand the return of the thread. We will ask for the value. Punishment, when it's possible to confine to the perpetrator alone, it's obligatory to confine harm or punishment to the perpetrator alone. If you can't confine it and a greater harm will ensue, then let me give you an example. To use weapons of mass destruction. Weapons of mass destruction for them were what? The catapult was the weapon of mass, manjaniq, a weapon of mass destruction, because it does indiscriminate killing. It does indiscriminate killing. To use a weapon like this would not be permissible unless avoidance would result in greater harm. Avoidance would result in greater harm. In this case, you could use it. So that is why many scholars said you could use al-manjaniq in al-jihad al-wajib only. So that is defensive jihad. You could use catapult in defensive jihad. Anyway, also, there was like one example. So performing the Friday or the Eid prayers behind an immoral person or a fasiq. In the madhab, the imama of the fasiq, the imama of the wicked, disobedient, immoral person is not valid in the madhab, in the Hanbali madhab. It's not valid. But if there is a wicked, disobedient, immoral person leading the Friday or the Eid prayer, and there is no one else that you can pray behind, you go and pray the Eid prayer. Because here, the greater harm is your basically avoidance of the Eid prayer. Missing the Jum'ah, missing the Eid prayer, breaking the community apart, this would be the greater harm. So if it is only one person and that person happened to be immoral, disobedient, wicked, then you still pray behind them. You know how people used to, they may still do, to stand up for people arriving, coming into the room or into the majlis, to stand up. Was that the custom of the Prophet ﷺ and the companions? No. In fact, Anas ibn Malik said they didn't love anyone more than they loved the Prophet ﷺ, and they would not stand up for him لما يعلمون من كراهته لذلك, because they knew that he disliked it. He hated when people stood up for him. So when someone comes into the majlis, you don't stand up for them. That's the sunnah. Unless they're coming from, unless you haven't seen them for a long time, they're coming from like far distance, they're coming back into town after travel. كانوا يقومون للغائب لتلقيه. Someone who was absent, someone who was traveling, and they came back, then they may, stand up for them to receive them. Now, so Imam Taqiyuddin ibn Taymiyyah said that if the custom is to stand up for people, and if you don't stand up for them, they will think that you're basically denying their right, or that you're belittling them or demeaning them by not standing. Then in this case, to avert the greater harm, you stand up for them until people become more educated, become more aware of the sunnah. So how do we do this? Because if we abandon the sunnah every time for people's tastes, then we will never be able to revive the sunnah. You do it gradually. You do it by istifadat al-balagh, by spreading knowledge, by reiterating that this is not something that you should be doing all the time. Sometimes you may do it, but you shouldn't be doing it all the time. It should not be the routine custom for people to stand up when someone is coming in. Likewise, the kissing of hands. Did they kiss the hands of each other? Did they kiss the hands of the ulama and salihin? They did. Did they do this every time they met? They didn't. So we say what? It's okay every once in a while, particularly if you do this to humble yourself and to show humility, but it should not be a routine thing, because it was not a routine thing for the first community. They did not kiss the hands of, the salihin and the ulama as a routine thing. If it is done every once in a while, particularly as a practice of humility and to humble oneself and to honor a teacher or something of that nature, that is okay, but it should not be a routine. The same applies to standing up for people. You should not be standing up for people if they are aware of the sunnah. If they are aware of the sunnah, if we have spread knowledge enough that people are aware of the sunnah, then we should practice the sunnah, because there is nothing better than the sunnah. If they are not, and you fear that it will cause more harm, they will be offended, then you stand up for them until they become more educated. So finally, I said at the end, know that prioritizing matters requires knowledge and fairness. Obligatory acts take precedence over recommended ones, and individually binding duties come before collective ones. The superior is prioritized over the less significant, and matters specific to a particular time or place are given precedence in their context. Public benefit is prioritized over private benefit. Immediate obligations take precedence over these that can be delayed, and necessities are prioritized over needs, which in turn come before enhancements, and so on. So if you, obligation over sunnah, okay? Sunnah in the sense of recommendation. And then individual obligation over collective or communal. If it is your individual obligation, then you prioritize it over communal obligations. Like we said, you provide for your family before you finance jihad. Also, we prioritize public interest over private interest. Also, you prioritize immediate obligations over what is ala tarahi. Ala tarahi means non-immediate, that which can be delayed. What else do you prioritize? Yeah. Necessities over needs, and needs over enhancements. This is daruriyat, hajiyat, tahsiniyat. You prioritize daruriyat over hajiyat and hajiyat over tahsiniyat. Immediate over non-immediate. Public over private. Individual obligation over collective obligation. Obligation over sunnah. And you want to do this all the time. Like if you want to figure out, if you want to prioritize even in managing your time, you want to prioritize, then there are two factors. you will have to give a number to every task when you want to prioritize tasks. Importance and urgency. Those are the two factors that you have to think of, because you have countless tasks to finish. Which ones should you prioritize? You will have to give a number, multiply for importance, a number for urgency, multiply importance by urgency, and that's how you figure out how to prioritize tasks. And usually urgency, the immediate over the non-immediate, would be prioritized. So if you have an important task, but you feel that you could do it tomorrow, and you have a less important task, but if it is not done today, it's over, then you prioritize the less important over the more important because of that urgency. But you're always looking at urgency and importance. Urgency and importance. قولوا قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك اشهد ان لا اله الا انت استغفرك واتوب اليك.